It might be time for the Philadelphia Eagles to trade for a wide receiver, but who could be available across the NFL for Howie Roseman? We'll get into that on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by my co-host, Gino Camilleri. We're brought to you today by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, although sports are returning now. This summer, though, FanDuel has been hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. And you know, if I was a betting man, which I definitely am, especially during football season, I would bet that Howie Roseman is going to add a pass catcher at some point before the season starts. We've been alluding to that over the last few shows after looking at that first preseason tape. And Johnny Wilson had some good reps, especially as a blocker, and there were a couple flashes by Britt and Covey. But overall, we'll see what happens when Parris Campbell is back. Like, that's a big domino to fall. We'll see how he plays. But I think when you combine the need for a wide receiver 3 and a potential starting outside guy if Devontae Smith or A.J. Brown get hurt, and the underwhelming play at tight end behind Dallas Goedert, I really do think if none of these guys step up on Thursday night, they're not going to wait for that third preseason game. I think Howie will make a move before that at one of these two positions, if not both.
They do have a little bit of a luxury being the only team that does play on Thursday night outside of the team they're obviously playing.
A little bit of a head start.
So they're going to have 2 days ahead of the competition to say, hey, we've evaluated our roster. Let's say it comes Friday and they say, we do not have a guy that we trust right now if Parris Campbell isn't ready to go. Is this going to be the influx of veteran free agents like you saw at the linebacker position last year? Probably not. Even though there are some guys out there that could give you serviceable minutes, if slant boy Michael Thomas is your cup of tea, he's
Juju
out
Smith-Schuster, I think, just got released.
Corey Davis is still a free agent, one of the more intriguing, bigger body type.
Can they convince Devontae Parker to come out of retirement? Maybe.
Probably not. Once you hear the R word in any sport, your foot is out the door. And he did retire for a reason. But I think the ultimate move will be scouring some of these deeper depth charts. You look at a team like Green Bay, who they have Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed and Christian Watson. You're saying, who else can they even throw out there? Well, they're like 8th guy right now is Ben Skoranek, who was just signed from the Los Angeles Rams. Could he potentially be a guy that you go out there and get? And we've talked about maybe calling up Houston. They have a plethora of bodies that you could bring in. So you have to look at the strengths of wide receiver units around the league, where you could get one of these favorable market deals where you're not overpaying and potentially say, hey, we got a overload of offensive linemen and overload of defensive backs. Let's see if we could do a player trade. But I don't think it's going to be a second, third round pick for a high profile wide receiver. It'll probably be some sort of pick swap, late round pick move to bring in at least somebody who has played minutes at that X receiver type of position, because ultimately I think you and I and a lot of people are on the same page. Devontae Smith operates best in the slot where he can just dominate people with those.
In this new offense, especially
in a Kellen Moore world, that guy on the outside, he's going to be very important, because right now you have guys that can be serviceable on the inside. Like we talked about with Britt and Covey, he could get by at
Campbell
times for you. And same with Parris Campbell, and same with these running backs that you'll see line up in the slot. But if I were to bet, like you said, Lou, one of those bigger bodied X receivers who can be a 3 to 4 catch guy a game for you, he might be on Howie Roseman's radar right now.
I agree. And I think you could look at a lot of guys that are surprise cuts or maybe not surprising. You look at Kansas City, could a Skyy Moore be available, or a Kadarius Toney? A lot of those Texans receivers you mentioned, like Noah Brown's not going to get cut, but maybe Robert Woods could, or John Mechie. There could be a lot of players available, but maybe Howie Roseman wants to get ahead of that before other teams are in on this competition through either waivers or through trade negotiations or just free agency itself. Maybe he does want to.
Skoranek was a Packer. He's also on Houston as well. So they're
Skoranek's a Texan.
Loaded.
I
spoke there.
But Wicks is an interesting one for Green Bay because they do have Watson, Jaden Reed, Doubs, like would Wicks be available?
Bo Melton, who was a former favorite for us, and
Bo Melton.
There's plenty of teams, man, that they got at least 4 guys where you're saying, yeah, they're good up top. The Eagles don't. And is Howie going to make that same mistake again, Lou, where he is one of his biggest strengths is seeing an issue in the past, not making it again. He's not going to allow this wide receiver situation to play out. Sorry for interrupting you. I just wanted to correct myself.
No, you're good.
Not a Green Bay Packer, but those are the teams you're looking to attack right now.
I think Houston is an obvious place to target a receiver, right? Of course, you got Noah Brown, you've got Robert Woods, you've got John Mechie, and they have their big 3 already set in stone with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs as well in that equation. But, Gino, I thought of a team that the Eagles just practiced with. You're playing in a preseason game Thursday. The GMs, I'm sure, are interacting. You look at the New England Patriots, they drafted Javon Baker this year in the draft and Jalen Polk. They re-signed Kendrick Bourne. They signed KJ Osborne. Demario Douglas is a guy that has some explosive ability. He's not maybe somebody that could play on the outside, but could be that explosive player on the inside, that higher end wide receiver 3. Or if you do want that player that could be on the outside as well, maybe a Bourne, Osborne, or a Douglas are available. I do wonder if New England could be an underrated team to look at here because Polk and Baker look really good so far throughout the training camp and preseason process.
And one of the things that's been discussed when acquiring players is that live evaluation period in the past against some of these teams when they have gone and done these inter-squad scrimmages, because that's the first time you see another live opponent. And they have, Howie Roseman, I think, has said that verbatim, that there's been instances where they have seen guys in those practices and they put them on. I mean, they have every guy on their roster and their depth and everybody that they want to sign eventually. But you see these guys up close and personal, like you said, Kendrick Bourne, Lou. That's an enticing name because he has played some big time snaps for some important in big time games, and he's played that X receiver type of position. What is the salary that Howie Roseman is willing to take on, though, at this point in the summer? Is he willing to go, I want a rookie deal?
Well, that's why maybe Demario Douglas, like, I'm not saying they have to trade for an X. They might want to upgrade the slot position, Gino, so they don't have to feel like Devontae has to just play there or just on the outside. And Douglas, to me, would be an upgrade over what you have there, and he's healthy, and he's another return option, too. So I think we would ideally want a player that you add to be inside-out versatile in case of an injury, but I don't think that would Howie would only go for that kind of player if they made a Douglas kind of player available for a trade.
It will be telling by the player that they acquire.
Yes,
right?
agreed.
And we're saying this as a hypothetical, but this is a move that it's so out of Howie Roseman's playbook to where it's so clear and obvious. The team has made it be known that they're just essentially asking for players to step up at this point. One of your draft picks looks better than another. You're waiting for them still to come along. It's not a dire emergency like we talked about yesterday, Lou, but within a snap, you're one snap away from losing one of your big 3, and all of a sudden Parris Campbell is your second guy up. And if that's the case, is Johnny Wilson pigeonholed to be an outside receiver, and now you kind of just have to line up these 3 guys in 11 personnel and everybody kind of knows exactly what you're going to throw at them? That doesn't seem to be the case in a Kellen Moore offense where you're going to want to be creative, where you're going to want to move guys around this formation. I think Kansas City has a lot of those type of players where it's like, we might not get unbelievable wide receiver route running type of play, but I think in a Kellen Moore world, we can suffice with them like a Mecole Hardman type of player. You mentioned Skyy Moore multiple
Justin
times.
Watson, maybe even Mahomes trusted him last year down the field.
I think it could potentially be one of those moves because you're feeling better about the guy calling plays this go around than you were last year. Like if last year is the case, you're saying we have to get somebody that can just be a 50-50 separator, can win jump balls. Now you're saying this guy kind of has to do a little bit of everything. They also have to block well. They have to be able to move. They can't be a stiff route runner.
Right.
They're going to take on a big responsibility in this offense, whether it's just to be that clear out guy to help your big 3 or potentially being the next guy up. So Howie Roseman, this is a big move, and it's August 14th. Howie Roseman makes moves that come back to play pay dividends late in the season. Look at when he signed Zach Cunningham. Look at the Corey Graham move that I always jokingly talk about, but he was signed at this point in the season.
Well, you also broke that story on Twitter.
Second time, not the first time. Yeah, his brother did live above
Okay,
me.
that's fair.
Yes.
No, I agree. I think there's a lot of teams out there that would want maybe a defensive back that you might end up cutting, and instead they're like, no, give us Josh Jobe or Zach McPherson or an Eli Ricks, and it's kind of a player for a player swap, or just to avoid them going on waivers or hitting the open market, you throw in a conditional day 3 pick. I think that's a big option for the Eagles, and they really need to definitely look into that option if Thursday does not go the way they want for the receivers on that team. So we'll get into more trade ideas, players to watch for Eagles Patriots, all that and more coming your way on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
This episode of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Here at LOE, we love sports and we never want them to stop. As we know, the summer is coming to an end, and you know what that smell is? It's crisp fall air coming our way, and that means football is right around the corner. And FanDuel allows us to go 24/7, 365, and stay in on the action and dream up bets at any time we are in the mood. With summer coming to a close, FanDuel is hooking up all their customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, with football season on the horizon, there's something for everyone, every day, all season long. So right now, head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of this season. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and all of the shows here at the Locked On Podcast Network.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day, guys. You should make your second listen the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So yeah, Gino, I think trading for a receiver, maybe even a tight end, it could be a big move that they're already considering, and maybe Thursday doesn't really change their mind about that approach. But I think Thursday could be huge because if Johnny Wilson looks great or if Britton Covey dominates, then they might feel a little bit more comfortable to hold off another week or maybe go into the season with what they have. But if the result that you got last week, Friday, is the result again against New England where Covey's okay, Wilson doesn't really make any splash plays, struggles to separate, I think this could happen before the third preseason game.
You brought up tight end, and it's interesting to me because if Grant Calcaterra once again looks like probably the best pass catcher on the field, I would say last week.
Combined positions, yeah.
Tight end might be one where you're saying we're happier there than we were last week. But
and the options on the open market are not. I don't even know who's available. Like Washington's not giving their division rival Zach Ertz before the year.
I'm looking at a team like Indianapolis, former third-round pick in Jelani Woods, who's buried a little bit on the depth chart, and you're talking about a guy who's more of a receiving type of body player that could take on that role of that third-ish wide receiver for you, and that's the type of route I would go with tight end.
I didn't even think of that. I like that. Yeah.
I wouldn't go with let's get somebody like Alberto and Uzama who's just a blocker. No, this guy has to be able to change your offense. But at the same time, Calcaterra might all of a sudden be a weapon for you that you can utilize. And they're saying, all right, let's focus on that outside receiver position. But I want more than anything come Thursday night. And we saw it. Tanner McKee started to get some more of those second team reps, Lou. Let's see if it's a chicken or the egg thing. Maybe the offense with Kenny Pickett did not allow these wide receivers to flourish. If Tanner McKee is out there with the twos and things do look a little bit different, I think we just have to see it under a different set of eyeballs because you have to get somebody that's at least going to push the ball down the field like Jalen Hurts. And if we're going to have check down Charlie and Kenny Pickett once again doing exactly that, how are we going to evaluate the second group of wide receivers? And then you're saying, all right, we have to bring in somebody. Then they go play with Jalen Hurts, and it's like, oh, we were fine all along. We didn't really need to go and get somebody. We just had to get them playing with the ones. But I think ultimately Tanner McKee playing with the twos, give him a good half of football. You already really know what Kenny Pickett is at this time. Like, what is going to totally change?
I completely agree with that, especially for Johnny Wilson. There was actually a rep that he was open. Was he completely separated from the corner? No. Johnny Wilson will never be completely separated from the corner. Kenny Pickett is not the kind of quarterback to give him that 50-50 chance most of the time. It's why George Pickens did not play that well with Kenny Pickett last year and didn't really take off until Mason Rudolph, crazy enough saying that, was the quarterback for Pittsburgh. So I think, Gino, that's a really good point. Tanner McKee might be a key to evaluating these receivers this week because Kenny Pickett does not give me the vibe where he's going to give Johnny Wilson more opportunities. That's why I feel like he gravitated more towards Britton Covey, who was open underneath a lot, and he's throwing short of the sticks 90% of the time. So that's a good point. I mean, with Johnny Wilson, you have to give him some chances if he has a little bit of separation, because if not, there was no point of drafting him because he's never going to be a Devontae Smith separator, ever.
And he's probably the guy that we're looking to evaluate the most right now. Like, let's just call it out.
Because you know what Covey and Campbell are. I mean, you know their role. You know they're not going to be more or less probably than what they are. Wilson could be more or less.
Exactly. And you need to know. You need to have some semblance of an idea because practice is one thing. And
all the more reason to play McKee, man.
I'm 100% with you, Lou, because let's just look at it like this. Like, Tanner McKee is competing to win a QB2 job, right?
Yep.
Kenny Pickett is still trying to show that he can lead an offense and be a serviceable quarterback in the NFL. Like, if you look at his performance last week, it's a safe, average performance for a quarterback who took care of the football, didn't put it in precarious positions. Yeah, that's good if you were auditioning for that role. But the role you're auditioning for in Philadelphia is somebody that can keep up the pace with this offense when things do go south. Because Kenny Pickett was moved for that exact reason, because he couldn't do that with the Steelers offense. So it might not look perfect with Tanner McKee, but you at least have to give these guys a chance. I think you continue to try and put the ball in the hands of guys like Grant Calcaterra, push the ball into the hands of some of these tight ends, see what they can do, man. Like, if EJ Jenkins is the third best guy, the only one that can catch, let's see it. Let's see what these running backs can do in the pass game as well. See how much of a benefit Will Shipley and even Kenny G and maybe a Lou Nichols wows you in that pass game. We just can't sit back on our hands and just run the football again because we know we can run the football with this good O-line. You have to figure out what you had in the pass game. That is the biggest pressing need come Thursday night. We have the first opportunity to go against an opponent that is, I would say, far inferior. And if we can't do anything with these guys on offense, Lou, yes, then it is panic mode. Now we know we truly have to go and find some depth for them.
Panic in a vacuum for this situation. But again,
yes,
you do
of course. Yeah,
I just want to put that.
We're looking at it in like a 3-day window.
Yes, correct.
On Eagles.
We're talking about it
long season thing.
And Devontae Smith, Dallas Scott, and A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, or Eagles. We're not saying it's panic mode for the passing game. This is like one of the best passing games.
We're talking about wide receiver 3 and 4.
Yeah, we're talking about it in a vacuum, people. So if you see like our intensity and the panic, it's about this exact role. It's not about the state of the Eagles offense.
No, we feel really good about this team after the last couple
of
weeks, man.
Because a lot of these players we're talking about now would have been wide receiver 1 like 2-3 years ago. So, but it does make me think too, Tyler Boyd signed with the Tennessee Titans pretty late into the offseason. Kind of makes you wish the Eagles were in on that a little bit because Tennessee, like, they're in a similar situation where they have DeAndre Hopkins, they signed Calvin Ridley, they have their 2 alphas. They don't really believe in Treylon Burks anymore, and they added Boyd as that, like, final piece. I almost kind of wish, I don't know, like, contractually if it would have worked, but, like, man, I would love a Tyler Boyd kind of player in this offense right now.
What about a Treylon? What about a Nick Westbrook-Akine? Like, he was their number 1 or 2
long time
for a little bit, and all of a sudden he's the 4th or 5th guy on that roster. And I'm with you, Lou. Like, you have to at least be willing to take chances to upgrade this position because, man, if you were in on the Tyler Boyd situation, how much better would you be feeling about this position?
I feel a lot better
now. And
I thought of one more trade.
Parker thing, man. It threw
it did
such a wrench in there because you
underratedly so.
When you're in the big boardroom and Howie's got all of his magnets and he's like, all right, Devontae Parker, fill him in there. We got our role. This is him. Wide receiver 3. We're not going to have to worry about it. We at least know we can get a year of play out of him. Well, all of a sudden, come the middle of the summer, that magnet is gone. And a lot of those magnets you probably would have filled him in with, the Tyler Boyds, they're gone too. But let's hear your trade example because this might be.
I have one more trade. I was just thinking about like what corners you could trade, right? Like what teams could use a corner. The Rams lost one of their starters this offseason. Maybe you move James Bradbury. Maybe you move a Josh Jobe, a Zach McPherson, and Eli Ricks. And they did add a lot of pass catchers this offseason. They have Puka Nacua. Cooper Kupp is going to be healthy. Tutu Atwell last year, the first half of the year, was pretty solid. Again, this is not, a lot of my options are not that starting outside replacement for Smith or Brown. But if you want to upgrade that third guy around them, Tutu Atwell's another player that's interesting, and multiple teams did call about Atwell's availability this offseason, so just made me think, too, there's a lot of guys out there if they want to bring in some competition. These Eagles receivers, they're not safe. They have to have a huge day tomorrow night.
And if you, our everydayers, think we're like world breakers breaking this news of all these players available, Howie Roseman and his staff have been doing this work for months.
Yeah, they want to see what they have, and so far, not so good.
And it seems like everything that they've been saying, Lou, that they're open for business here. Howie Roseman himself has said he's been working.
Yeah, they haven't sugarcoated it. They said, we'll see who steps up. They didn't hype up anybody.
Nope. And we're maybe 2 days away from finding out if that move does come, because after those games on Saturday, when the rest of the league does play, I would imagine Howie Roseman does get after it and a move does come, because you're either going to see him wait until the cut down, or he's going to say, I got my guy, I'm going to identify my guy, and I'm going to go get my guy, which probably is Howie Roseman's MO.
All right, we'll wrap up the show coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. We're going to go around the league, looking at the first week of the preseason. Did we get a little hint of two new NFC teams that could be a threat to the Eagles, both short-term and long-term? We'll get into that coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy, they're more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. Once again, that's BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month of online therapy. All right, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, going across the league. And Gino, I was watching some preseason football this weekend after the Eagles-Ravens matchup. And again, it's one preseason game, but it kind of confirmed what I've already suspected. And we'll see if the trend continues. But two teams that drafted quarterbacks with the top two picks, the Chicago Bears, the Washington Commanders in the NFC East. Like, Gino, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, they did look really good. And in a conference where there's not a lot of established star quarterbacks, those are two teams I'm keeping an eye on, especially with Dallas's decline. Washington might end up being, and New York I think is terrible, the Commanders might sneakily end up being like a competitor for the Eagles in this division. Like, they might be the second team I'm watching within like a year or two, especially if Dak Prescott leaves next year.
I would say within a year or two.
Yeah, not this year, but more long-term for Washington.
This year is so boom or bust for Washington. Yes. I said this when I was on Locked On Cowboys with Marcus Mosier, that it gives me 2011 Eagles Dream Team vibes where it can either go 100% perfectly or just crash.
Because they did add a ton of veterans. It's not like it's like a super young team.
No, I mean, outside of their last couple draft classes where they've got some premier players both on offense and defense, obviously.
Like Eckler, Wagner, Ertz. I mean, they added a ton of old guys.
You're talking about guys that are a few years from like getting their gold jackets, but they're a couple years removed from their prime. Chicago, you guys complained about Caleb Williams painting his nails and crying
it looks
on the
ridiculous
sideline.
because
he
looked
so
good.
absurd. Just watch the football game.
And their roster,
so
Gino,
good,
is
man.
Their roster. They're a unit with something. The talent that he's got around him. When was the last time a quarterback had that kind of support system instantly the minute he came into the league?
Like DeAndre Swift, man, he was smiling ear to ear in his
he looked good, by the way.
Conference. He seems pretty.
I was watching that. He ripped off a big run or off a screenplay where Caleb pulled this Mahomes like shuffle pass off, and Swift got deep, and I'm like, I'm not saying we're going to regret that move. Saquon Barkley's going to be a stud, but the panicky, pessimistic person in me saw that run. I'm like, damn, is Saquon going to get hurt this year? And we're wishing we had this guy.
Why would you even say that, Lou? Knock on wood. Really.
I know he looked good though in that game. So, but I agree. I think Chicago for this year is going to be a problem in the NFC like right away.
Green Bay scares the ever living.
Yeah, I agree. Pretty much that whole North
guy finish in the blanks. They're going to be really good. Speaking of the NFC North, Lou.
Oh my God. We got to talk about the Vikings. They have had the worst offseason I've ever seen.
It's terrible. I feel for them. JJ McCarthy has a meniscus injury, which is going to keep him out for I've never heard a meniscus injury keeping somebody out for the year. And then the same day, Jordan Addison goes down in practice.
They lost to one of their starting corners this year.
We complain about like our wide receiver 3 and 4. Let's just be happy the injuries are not hitting the Philadelphia Eagles right now, because we've been there. We've seen.
Oh, we've had that kind of offseason many times since doing this podcast.
We feel for the Minnesota Vikings right now, and they're going to be a team, man. When they put it all together, though, that you look at Jordan Addison being a number 2 for Justin Jefferson. Like, they're on the climb too, man.
Do they want Kenny Pickett for a first-round pick, the Minnesota
Somebody
Vikings?
drum that up. Kenny Pickett might be Sam Bradford.
Do they want Tanner McKee?
No, you got to keep Tanner, man. You don't want to go into this season with Kenny Pickett. But all in all, Lou, I think the first week of the preseason, I think the youth movement, every team understands that you have to go young at a lot of these positions. Like, how do you allow some of these running backs and wide receivers to just put on these performances in the preseason? You're like, all right, we're going to trot out a 28, 29-year-old running back. It doesn't happen. That's why you got to be fresh. You got to be young, got to have guys that run. So this is a different offseason for the Eagles, but hopefully Thursday night is another productive game for them. And you're looking around the league saying we're right there with the rest of them.
No, completely agree. Jaden Daniels looks good. We'll see if Washington finally has a quarterback. It's fun. That's the thing. I don't like the Commanders, but I do remember that kind of excitement, like when you first realize, oh, we've got a quarterback, and he's exciting.
Carson Wentz first time,
like 2016,
Tampa Bay. That was
a fun feeling.
Season game. Zach Ertz comes open over the middle. Carson
Great
Wentz
feeling.
Sidewinds this thing in there, and you're saying, yeah, we got the guy. And then we did that with Jalen Hurts, and we are sitting pretty with the quarterback.
And then we got the guy. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Got one more show for you before the preseason game against New England. 2 more shows this week. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure your second listen is the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Go get ready for your drafts. Until then, for Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.